Hello, and welcome to Mr. Quaker's Teaches. In today's lesson, I'll be providing a detailed analysis of the poem Rising 5 by Norman Nicholson. My analysis will be presented with rolling annotations of the stanzas, lines, and important words and phrases in the poem. I'll emphasize the themes, literary devices, both figurative and poetic. I'll speak on the tone, structure, language, etc. of the poem. To purchase the course that provides stanza by stanza, line by line, and word for word written and video analysis of all the 15 poems in the IGCSE anthology, visit mrquakersteaches.com. The written course has been particularly helpful for students sitting the IGCSE because it gives clear guidance on the approved writing styles. Without further ado, join me. Let's demystify Rising 5 by Norman Nicholson. First, a bit of a background about the poet. Norman Nicholson was born on the 8th of January 1914 and sadly passed on the 30th of May 1987. He was an English poet, and his poetry is noted for local concerns, his straightforward language, and the elements of common speech. So what that means is that he speaks about things that are, very local to him, and the language is clear. We're going to see that as well in the poem, elements of common speech, and you see that in the use of the word rising in the poem. Now, the poem Rising 5 is actually divided into 4 stanzas, but for the sake of space, I've divided those stanzas into 2 slides. And we'll begin first by, giving a brief summary. I'll begin first by giving a brief summary of the poem, and then we'll read it, and then we'll dive into it nicely. The poem begins with this petulant little boy that claims to be older than he is. Instead of 4, he claims to be 5. And also what happens on his eye, in his face, his head, and other things. And Nicholson finally revealing to the reader the boy's exact age. And also continues into the second stanza and states what happens in broader nature, in the fields and the manifestations of nature during spring, and continues into the third stanza with what happens in the evening and how dust and light interacts, and concludes with a very philosophical stanza that speaks about the axiomatic notion that we are all going to lose our place of importance over time, and so we should make the most of our most useful period of our lives, which is our youth. The poem ends quite like in a dark way because it speaks about the grave and death. But here Nicholson expresses that when people live too preoccupied with the idea of death or the future, obsession with the future, they end up not living. They just wake up one day and then they realize that they are dead. So Rising 5 by Norman Nicholson. I'm rising 5, he said, not 4. And the little coils of hair unclicked themselves upon his head. His spectacles, brimful of eyes to stare at me and the meadows, reflected cones of light above his toffee buckled cheeks. He'd been alive 56 months, or perhaps a week more, not 4. But rising 5. Around him in the field, the cells of spring bubbled and doubled. Buds unbuttoned, shoot and stem shook out the creases from their frills, and every tree was swathed in green. It was the season after blossoming, before the forming of fruit, not May, but rising June. And in the sky, the dust dissected tangential light, not day, but rising night, not now, but rising soon. The new buds push the old leaves from the bough. We drop our youth behind us like a boy throwing away his toffee wrappers. We never see the flower, but only the fruit in the flower. Never the fruit, but only the rot in the fruit. We look for the marriage bed in the baby's cradle. We look for the grave in the bed, not living, but rising dead. So that's like the whole sort of like the poem. And the first thing we see about the poem is that the poem is stated in the first person. It begins with the first person, and we hear clearly from the use of the speech marks It says the use of the first person pronoun am reveals that the persona is speaking for himself, while the use of the speech marks reveal that the poetic voice wants the reader to hear directly from the persona. Rising is a colloquialism that means nearly. So we see here that we are hearing directly from a speaker. He said. The use of the word he said there reveals that the poet is producing or is repeating the persona's words verbatim, word for word. And it continues not for. Not for exposes the petulance in the speaker's voice, stroke tone, and him strongly refuting the conferred age. So we see here that the boy is trying to refuse the age of 4 because he thinks that that's the age that is being conferred on him, but he's truly 5. Now, while all of this is happening, Norman Nicholson pants the image, so he sort of broadens the image from the boy's mouth to what's happening on the boy's head. And he says, and the little coils of hair unclick themselves upon his head. So first of all, the use of the word little coils provides visual imagery of the kind of hair that the persona has. And we also see the use of personification as well. And we see that in the words unclick themselves upon his head. The use of the words unclick themselves highlights the personified strands of hair and highlights the irony of the persona trying to control time when he cannot control his little coils. So the boy wants to have control over something as powerful as time, something that cannot be stopped as time, when he cannot even control how his hair is behaving on top of his head. And that's a really striking image. After that, Nicholson shifts to the boy's face, and he tells us that the boy has spectacles brimful of eyes to stare. The use of the word spectacles reveals that the persona has like an eye defect and is struggling to see the value of time. So it doesn't only have like sight defect or eye defect that makes it difficult for him to see, but it also has this struggle with the ability to properly see and value time. So even though his eyes are brimful, so you see brimful of eyes to stare, the use of brimful of eyes to stare provides vivid visual imagery of the persona's eyes almost popping out of his glasses and reveals the seriousness of his eye defect. So he really has like a serious sight challenge. And he continues that at me and the meadows. At me and the meadows exposes the persona's divided gaze. So the boy is looking both at Nicholson and also the meadows, which is like nature. And the fact that he's divided his gaze as he tries to look at the poet and nature at the same time, but he cannot properly see either of them. So if you're trying to look at two things at the same time, you're going to lose sight of both, or you're not going to be able to see both. And that's exactly what happens with the boy. And also, the at me and the meadows can also be used as a metaphor for the boy trying to look at the present time and the future at the same time. So he cannot see either of them because he's trying to look at the present and the future, which makes it impossible for him to properly see either of them. So he loses sight of both the present time that he's supposed to be living and enjoying, and also the future because the future has not yet happened. He continues that reflected cones of light. The use of the word reflected, like the boy's spectacles, the boy is also trying to reflect the present time, like turn it away because he doesn't want to live in it. He wants to live in a time when he's 5 years old, not 4. And then we are told that above his toffee buckle cheeks. The use of the word above his toffee buckle cheeks exposes that the persona loves sweets. And it also highlights his innocence as well. So all the actions that he's taking are being carried out in innocence. And then like the boy, you see, Nicholson is trying to present to the reader that everyone is born with an innate ability to waste time. So we have this natural ability to waste time. He continues in the sit line after the full stop in the sit line says he'd been alive 56 months or perhaps a week more. So 56 months or perhaps a week more shows that the persona was 4 years and 8 months old. So he's not exactly 5 years. So by claiming to be 4 months older than he is, he's throwing away 4 months of his life. And he doesn't care. He's rising 5, not 4. So we see here that the petulance of the boy's attitude is not only to the speaker but also to time. And this is important because it creates the effect that human beings are naturally born with a disposition to try to waste time. After the word more, we see the use of a colon. The use of a colon signals that Nicholson is about to provide more details or more information. Instead, he allows a sizable indentation from after the colon of the 6th line to the 8th line. The indentation signifies how the boy wastes his time. He concludes the stanza by caricaturing the persona by repeating not 4 but rising 5. So he says exactly what the boy has said about time. So not 4 but rising time. And this is really important because the boy's innocence is carrying out actions of wasting 4 months of valuable time, which he thinks is nothing. But as he grows older, he's going to see that 4 months is extremely valuable time. In the second stanza, again, Nicholson broadens the setting to give the reader more view. And he says around him. So around the boy, he says that in the field, the cells of spring. So around him suggests that the boy was encircled by nature on every side. And that's we see in the use of the word field there. Yet, the boy was blind to it. So the boy has nature all around him, but he's not looking at the present time. He's rather casting his eyes to 4 months into the future. The cells of spring. The use of the word cell is important because cell is the basic unit of life. And the cells of spring suggest that it was a time of birth, rebirth, and the flourishing of nature. So it was like the best possible time for the boy to really bask in what was happening in nature. In fact, Nicholson continues that it bubbled and doubled. The use of the word bubbled suggests that there was vitality and life. It was palpable, it could be seen. And double reveals that there were twofold and exponential increase in all the aspects of nature that was visible and visible. So we see here that there was bubbling and doubling, but all of this, the boy is blinded to it because he's looking to be 4 months older. And we also see the first use of personification as well. The cells of spring bubbled and doubled. So the cells of spring is personified. And bubbled and doubled suggests that nature was happy and multiplying exponentially. It was alive, full of life, gleaming with life. We also see the use of a second personification, buds unbuttoned. Buds unbuttoned suggests that the buds, like gentlemen, undid their buttons to allow in some fresh air. And this is really important because it's almost as if nature is coming out of hibernation, and so it's flourishing and it's full of life. Then there's a third injection of personification, and you see that in the words shoot and stem shook out the creases from their frills. This highlights that multiple aspects of nature were experiencing rejuvenation and they were straightening themselves out. Shoot and stem for me are like twins, female twins, and then they are straightening themselves as trying to present themselves as prim and proper because it's a time of life. And this is really important because the shoot and stem have also been personified because we are told that they shook out the creases from their frills. We also see the use of sibilance as well. And we see that in the repetition of the S sound in shoot and stem shook out the creases from their frills. This provides auditory imagery of the sound of the re-emergence of nature. So nature is re-emerging. So it's not only visually that you can experience nature, but you can also experience nature with your ears, with your auditory senses. You can, if you listen out for nature, you can see nature, doing smashing and great things. We also see the use of anaphora as well in the repetition of the word and as the first word of the third line and the fourth line of the second stanza. The use of the anaphora and emphasizes that multiple aspects of nature were coming alive simultaneously. So, and shoot and stems shook out the creases from their frills, and every tree was shrouded. So, multiple aspects of nature were coming out, were being rejuvenated simultaneously. And every tree was swathed in green. Every tree was swathed in green, earmarks the rejuvenation of nature that is evidenced by the visual imagery of every tree being dipped in a rich greenness that highlights their freshness. So every aspect of nature was fresh, and there was nothing that was left in its former state or in its dead state. Then we see that Nicholson injects a riddle. He says it was the season after blossoming before the forming of fruit. The season after blossoming is spring, before the forming of fruit. So we see here that he's trying to tell us that there are two things that are happening here. It was the season after blossoming, before the forming of the fruit. It's almost as if it was the middle of this season. And this is really important because I think that Nicholson doesn't want the reader to pay too much attention to the particular time of the year. He just wants the reader instead to bask in the beauty of nature that is manifesting. In the bubble and doubling, in the buds unbuttoning, and the shoot and stem shaking out the creases from their throat. So he just wants the reader to bask in it, not to become obsessed with what time or season it is. And so I think that's why he makes uses this kind of long drawn out riddle to make the reader think that, realize that is not something that they should become too focused on. Again, we see the repetition of the colon for the second time. This signals that, again, Nicholson is about to provide more information. But again, he doesn't. Instead, he allows a sizable indentation from after the colon of the 6th line of the 2nd stanza to just underneath the colon of the 7th line. The indentation signifies how people waste their time trying to perfectly calculate when a season begins. So here, he doesn't want the reader to become too obsessed with what season is he speaking about, but they should rather enjoy and bask in the manifestation of nature that he's explaining or speaking about. He concludes the 2nd stanza by again caricaturing the 4-year-old by stating not May, but rising June. So he's trying to say this is not the month of May, but we are rising, or it's nearly June. So we see here that again it's in the middle. And if the reader again becomes very obsessed with what the exact month or the day of the month, then again they are going to lose sight of all the explanations that Nicholson is trying to present in the beauty of nature. In the 3rd stanza, he again broadens and shifts the view of the poem from what's happening in nature to what's happening in the sky. He says that, and in the sky. But there is an indentation before he presents the word in the sky. So he plants the word, the first word and of the first line of the 3rd stanza, almost in the middle of the line, says, and in the sky. The indentation, of the first line visually indicates a change in time. So there's a change in time, and he's trying to use visual manifestation or with the, almost like the haphazard placement of the words on the page to present that information to the reader. And he says that the dust dissected tangential light. And this is personification. He personifies the dust. And it says here that the dust slices the weak tangential lights, and this presents nature as a place that is full of violence. So nature is not always, a lovey-dovey atmosphere, but it's also a place where brutal things happen. And this is an instance where it's happening, where the dust, realizing that the light has become weakened, is trying to slice it open, just like an expert, surgeon would do, trying to slice it to see like the entrails of the light, to see what constitutes or makes up the light. And this is a particularly striking image. And it's trying to show us here that as for nature, nature has violence in it. And if you watched shows that deals with nature, you see that a lot, where animals eat animals. That's nature for you. So then he continues again with another colon for the 3rd time to signal that he's about to provide again more information. But instead, there's another indentation. He allows a lengthy indentation from after the colon of the 2nd line of the stanza to just underneath the colon of the 3rd line. The indentation signifies that we'll be wasting our time if we are trying to be exact to the second when night begins. Then he continues and says, not day, but rising night. So it is not the daytime, but it's nearly night. Then he says, not now, but rising soon. The last 4 lines of this 3rd stanza reveals that time is not static, and that there are aspects of time that does not perfectly conform to daytime or nighttime. So we needn't trouble ourselves with it, but we should just bask in the happenings of nature. So we should be focused on the dust dissecting tangential light, and we should look out for it. We shouldn't instead become too obsessed with what time to the second that these events happen, but we should just look out for it, and when we see it, we should bask in it, we should enjoy it. And he continues and says, but rising soon. That's the last word or the last sentence of the 3rd stanza. And this is really striking because if you convert or translate the word but rising soon, it translates to but nearly soon. And that's a tautology. This highlights that when we become obsessed with time, we try to reduce time to the minutest degree, not only to like years or months or days or hours or minutes or seconds. Then we go into micro minutes and nanoseconds, and we go deeper and we try to find out, to pinpoint the exact second in which an event happens. So we become so obsessed with time that we try to slice time into even smaller bits, just as the tangential light is doing due to the dust carried out on the tangential light. And that makes us waste a lot of time. In the fourth stanza, we see a change in the tone, and Nicholson begins to sound more philosophical. The very first sentence of the fourth stanza is, "The new buds push the old leaves from the bough." And this is axiomatic, and this is true in every part of the world. Whether you like it or not, over time, the young people are going to go older, and then they are going to be pushed out of positions of influence by the, sort of the younger people. The new buds is a metaphor for young people. So Nicholson uses the new buds as a metaphor for young people. And then push as a metaphor for forceful takeover. The old leaves is a metaphor for the aged or those who are older. And then the bough is a metaphor for positions of influence. So what Nicholson is trying to say is that over time, young people are going to forcefully push the aged people from positions of influence and take over. And it's axiomatic, and it's like he wants the reader to have that in the front of their mind. And we also see a change in the point of view as well. He changes the point of view from the third person to the plural first person. So he begins to speak in this regard. Nicholson presents himself as a spokesman for the whole of humanity, and then he includes himself and says we, which means he's part of whatever he's going to speak about. And the very first thing he talks about is, we drop our youth behind us like a boy throwing away his toffee wrappers. The use of the word drop our youth is a simile, like a boy throwing is a simile. We see that with the inclusion of the word like there. The simile that creates a striking visual imagery of how cavalier and reckless humans are with time. And the time we're throwing away is our youth. And our youth is the most useful time of our lives. It's the time that we are most strong. And here he says that we just, recklessly use our youth. We throw it away like a boy throwing away his toffee wrappers. And if you throw it behind us, it means it's something we can never get back. If you lose your youth or your youthful years, you can never get it. And so here, he's trying to tell the reader that this is our attitude towards time. And this also was his attitude towards time. And so it is not the best attitude. It continues that we never see the flower. We never see the flower. We are blinded to the flower, but only the fruit. The flower is a metaphor for the process that we have to take towards achieving a goal. But he says here that we don't like it. So we refuse to see its usefulness to us. So if we are trying to achieve a certain result or a certain goal, for example, we see the process of trying to achieve the goal as very cumbersome. So we are looking instead to the fruit. So the fruit is the goal. So rather than basking and enjoying the process, which more often than not takes longer time, we only insist on the fruit. And he says we have but only the fruit in the flower. So we look past the flower and onto the fruit. And the fruit is a metaphor for the end goal or result, i.e. the fruit of your labor. So you hear that in the word, the fruit of your labor. So when they say fruit of your labor, it's what you get for your work. So, and his use of the word but only, they reveals our dissatisfaction with anything that's not our perfect desire. So when we want a particular goal and we don't achieve that goal, then we are sort of dissatisfied and we are unhappy. And we also have something that he describes as but only the attitude. And we see that in the repetition of the word but only the in two consecutive lines. And that qualifies it as an anaphora. The use of this device shows that man has an obsession with the future that he expresses with something called but only the attitude. And this is really important. And he says that but only the rot in the fruit. The rot is a metaphor for the imperfect aspects of our fulfilled achievements. So we don't see the flower, which is the process, because we are looking at the fruit, which is, achieve the goal we want to achieve. But when we finally get the fruit, which is our achievement, we don't see it as well. We only see the rot. We only see the parts of the things we've achieved that are imperfect. And again, he says that our obsession with the future is shown in us already seeing an infant as being married from the day they are born. And he continues that and says, we look for the marriage bed. So the marriage bed is marriage, when someone gets married. in the baby's cradle. So when the child is born, immediately the child is born, the very first thing we think about is the child becoming married. So, and that in some cultures leads to people being betrothed, to older people or other younger children. Because immediately a child is born, we look past, the celebration of their childhood from their infancy to them being like toddlers, teenagers, young adults. We look for them getting married. So we push past a lot of achievements in their life because we want to see them married, and then we want to see them have their own children. And it continues that we look for the grave in the bed. So when we finally achieve our desire of the bed, when the reader finally achieves that, he doesn't look at the bed anymore, the marriage bed, but he's now looking at when the person is going to die. So we begin to obsess about death. When somebody only just got married, so very soon you're going to be a grandfather, and very soon you're going to die. And we also see the repetition of certain words as well in this fourth stanza. We see the repetition of the word we, flower, fruit, look for thee, and in thee. Now, the repetition of the words in this stanza highlights man's penchant for repeating a wrong action multiple times. So our wastefulness with time is not something that we do once. We do it, we carry it on repeatedly. It's almost as if it's like something that is inherited from parents, and people carry it on over and over and over and over and over. He ends the fourth stanza again with a colon. And again, the use of the colon indicates that it's about to provide more information. But again, he doesn't do that. Instead, he allows another indentation. The lengthy indentation from the colon of the sixth line of the fourth stanza, just underneath the colon of the seventh line or the 30th line of the poem. The indentation indicates that man wastes a sizable amount of his time as he continues to watch for the future. So because we have this obsession with the future, we lose valuable time. And this is really important. And then he concludes the poem by saying that not living but rising dead. Nicholson concludes the poem by again repeating the words of the little boy in the first two lines of the poem. So we are not living but rising dead. We are nearly dead. His words show that living life as he has described in the last stanza means that we are not living but nearly dead. So we are very close to death if we have this constant obsession with the future. We are not seizing any day. Instead, we are looking to when we are done with school, when we are done with working. So over and over and again, we never sort of immerse ourselves in the moment. And he uses the word we there to show that Nicholson himself had the same challenge. Nicholson's words dead and grave injects a sense of foreboding to the conclusion. It also reveals that we will all experience death. So if we are going to experience death, we shouldn't become too obsessed with death. Instead, we should live our lives in the here and now. Some of the themes of the poem includes obsession with the future and the fact that time is a continuum, and carpe diem, seize the day, and then the beauty of nature, and then reckless living. The IGCSE questions are usually brought up, or the themes. The questions are sort of derived from the themes. So a question that you could meet in the exam could be, how does Nicholson present time as a continuum in the poem Rising 5? Or how does it talk about time as something that is not static in Rising 5? Or how does he advise or speak to the reader or implore the reader to seize the day in Rising 5? Or how does he vividly present the idea of reckless living in Rising 5? So those are questions that could be thrown to you in the exam. Now, another thing I realized about the poem is the time focus in each stanza. First of all, Nicholson presents the reader with the fact that time is not static. You cannot pin time down. You can stop a clock, but you can't stop time. And he's trying to also wants the reader to realize that time is constantly changing by the second, millisecond, microsecond, nanoseconds, etc. So time is always moving. In the first stanza, he focuses on months and weeks. So he speaks about how the boy's age. And he speaks about it in months. In the second stanza, he highlights the difficulty of correctly knowing the exact day and hour that a season changes. In stanza 3, he highlights the difficulty of stating the exact minute and second that night begins. So we see it changes the time, and then in the fourth and final stanza, he philosophically presents the flow of time and how man's obsession with the future affects his ability to enjoy each important achievement, because he has like this idea that everything now is not good, only the future is all the best things are in the future. In terms of the structure of the poem is made up of a total of 31 lines, and it also has 4 verses of unequal line lengths. So stanza 1 has 9 lines, stanza 2 has 8 lines, stanza 3 has 6 lines, and the 4th stanza also has 8 lines. And I think he uses this first paragraph to present to us that when we don't live life in a predictable way, our life appears very haphazard, and then looks as haphazard as the poem appears on the page. So sometimes we begin from the midday, sometimes we begin from the edge, and always we keep on wasting time. And the poem is also a free verse because it doesn't have a rhyme scheme. And I think this is also the case because life that is lived with such constant obsession with the future doesn't have any plan. If you enjoyed this lesson, you can actually purchase the course that will allow you to customize how you learn. And on the course, you find stanza by stanza, line by line, and word for word analysis of all the 15 poems in the IGCSE anthology. Even if I've provided some very particular details here, the written document actually goes into more details and gives you the points, gives you explanations, and also gives you evidence. And it's going to be really useful for people writing the IGCSE because you can actually pick certain details from it that you can present. And then you can also find analysis of the prose and drama components on the character, themes, and conflicts for Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and then The Crucible by Arthur Miller, and also information on the unseen paper if your school writes the unseen paper. Additionally, you can actually book for private tuition in Cambridge IGCSE or A-level in English language, English literature, geography, or history. If you need help in any of the subjects, you can just send an email there and then sign up for the lessons. You can also join our tribe on the IGCSE tribe on Telegram on Mr. Quickest Teaches IGCSE Literature. If you've enjoyed this lesson, please share it and then leave your comments, and also ask any questions in the comment section. So here you have it. Rising 5 by Norman Nicholson has been demystified. Until next time, bye bye.